Hey YouTube family, it's Mrs. Rains here. I wanted to come at you with a video today about my testimony. This was a requested video, and some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is probably a little bit risque if you're over, I would say if you're under the age of 18, or I guess maybe under the age of 16. I'll try to keep it as PG as possible, but some of the things I have to talk about to kind of explain how the Lord kind of shaped my life and shaped who I am today. And some of these things are things I've shared, with people individually, family members, women, women's conferences, different things like that. I've shared with other people, but these are things that I feel like have to be included in my testimony in order for it to make sense how far God has brought me. So I'm gonna jump right into it. If it starts to be long, I may have to make this into two parts, but I'll do my best to squeeze it all into one. So I was born in Western New York. I am a Army brat. My mother had been in the military for nearly 30 years before retiring. As I was growing up, she put herself in a position to where she could put herself through school, and she was also working two jobs and supporting myself and my brother after the divorce between her and my father. Um, Sorry, I keep looking down because I have some notes written down. I want to make sure I cover everything. I accepted Christ around age 6. I understood who Jesus is, and I understood that I was in need of a Savior. And I was led into prayer, and I was later on baptized in Lake Ontario. Although I was really young, I was kind of, people considered me advanced for my age, and I'll talk a little bit more about that down the line. My parents got divorced around the same time that I accepted Christ, so I was immediately kind of thrown into testing. And it was really hard for me because I guess I didn't understand all of what was going on at the time. Being older now, I kind of understand more and understand what my mother was dealing with, and so I get it. But at the time, it was pretty rough. I had a babysitter that took care of me while my mother was working, and she was like another grandmother to me. Her name was Madeir. Well, we called her Madeir. That wasn't her actual name, but if you grew up in any type of black family, everyone has a Madeir, and she was mine. And if you don't know, it's short for Mother Dear. So she was a very sweet woman. She cared for me like I was her own. People said that I was the apple of her eye. Later, I found out that she had had a relationship with my grandfather. Um, while my grandfather and grandmother were actually separated. I didn't realize that until I was much older, but then I understood why she cared for me so much. My grandfather wanted her to care for me because he passed away when I was around 8 or 9 months old. So I learned all of this, of course, later on. So a little while after my parents split up, I began being molested by a family member. I won't go into detail about that, but what I will tell you is that it estranged me from the entire one side of my family, my father's side. And so it did break up a lot of relationships that I had had since I was younger. And it was a little difficult for me, but at the same time, I know why it had to happen. During that time, my mother was able to get me a psychiatrist to help me kind of sort out my thoughts and feelings and what I was going through. And I'm not saying it was a good choice to get me to talk to someone, but now that I'm older, I realize I probably needed some spiritual counseling as well because in the back of my mind, I had those questions like, why would God let something like this happen to me? And that really wasn't being answered. So moving forward, I poured myself into schoolwork and activities. So I would be kind of out of the house all the time. I was in kids' college. I did, church groups and activities, anything I could to get kind of out of the house. My mother had gone through a little spell of depression because she felt like she couldn't protect me. And, I just feel like she did the best she could. And I love her so much for that. So I never faulted her in any way. But I can understand what she was going through now that I'm a mother myself. In middle school, I started being rebellious. I started to um, talk back and have a bad attitude. I was fighting all the time. I was getting into trouble. I was able to hide a lot of the trouble from my mom. We were living in the suburbs at the time, but because Medea lived in the city, I was able to go to city schools because she was my caretaker after school. So it kind of worked out that I was able to go to city schools. But I struggled to fit in because black girls ridiculed me because I wasn't black enough. White girls ridiculed me because clearly I'm not white. Hispanic girls, some loved me and wanted to be friends, and some just hated my guts for whatever reason. It was a really hard time because I was awkward. I was tall. I was skinny. I didn't quite fit in with any particular social group. I tried to befriend everyone, but it was kind of hard to do. And, you guys know how hard middle school can really be. So during that time, while I was in middle school, my Medea passed away. It was really hard on me. I took it to heart. Like, I struggled with that because I was with her the night she was passing away. I can recall being in the street with my cousin and flagging down the ambulance driver and trying to just sort out what was going on, and getting that phone call from the hospital finding out that she was gone was really, really hard on me. So I began being even more rebellious. By then, my mother was being activated full time in the military because of the Persian Gulf War. So, because she had to go to Fort Gordon for a lot of training and to train others who were going to be going over to Kuwait, I was sent to Mississippi, rural Mississippi, in the valley, okay, with my grandmother. And I had lots of family there, a lot of family support there. But during the time I was there, I noticed a change in me where I was kind of getting back to the person I used to be. And then I realized, I like it here. So my mom and my grandmother worked it out to where she could allow me to stay, and that way she could continue training. Sorry, this is kind of weird. She could continue her training of other soldiers going off to war. And during this time, I was able to kind of grow a lot. I was back into, doing well in school. I started doing sports and activities, clubs, you name it. I was a straight A student. I had lots of cousins in school with me, which was good. But also during that time, while I was in Mississippi, I noticed a lot of racism. I got to see it like front and center. And it wasn't something that was really spoken about, but you kind of knew it existed. So just as an example, the man who owned and ran the only pharmacy in town used to be a grand wizard in the KKK. Like, it was like that. So because I never witnessed this growing up in upstate New York, other than some of the bias I faced in middle school, it was an eye-opening experience for me. I was a community usher at that time at a Baptist church that my family was a part of. My grandmother had been diagnosed with diabetes, and she had a little glaucoma. So I began to be her caregiver, helping her take care of, writing her checks and bills for the month, and, driving her where she needed to go, stuff like that. But it was a fruitful time for me because I was, growing and, learning new things, and I was maturing. So it was definitely a wonderful time. I was able to receive a full scholarship to a black college, a historically black college or university, which is Jackson State. I went there for a couple of years before meeting my first, I guess, real boyfriend. And I think because of not having my father in my life all those years, for some reason I was searching for the love of a man, and this guy swept me off my feet. And it wasn't hard to sweep me off my feet because I was young and probably a little gullible. But I began to see him pretty regularly. I became pregnant. And around the end of my second trimester, beginning of my third trimester, I finally had to withdraw from school. Like, that broke my heart to do because I had a full scholarship. But I just couldn't work full time and take care of a child and deal with, some new drama that I was facing in my relationship. So I had to leave school. I began to get the inclination that he was cheating on me, so I had to, of course, get out of that relationship. I wound up back in New York with my mom. She did exact some tough love. I was not taking her car and going where I wanted. I was having to take the bus everywhere. I had to get a full-time job fairly quickly. She did help me a lot, don't get me wrong, but she did also kind of force me to stand on my own 2 feet, which I think was a great thing. I needed that. I needed to not be a spoiled brat. During that time, I began doing some modeling. It was, mostly editorial type stuff, and it wasn't lucrative in any way, but I began getting some exposure, and some callbacks and things like that. But during that time, I ended up rededicating to the Lord. I had become somewhat of a prodigal, and so I started going to this AME church with my mom. Love the church. It wasn't. It was a little bit more structured than I was used to with the Baptist church, but with it being an AME church, I had to take some classes and things like that. Because of my work schedule, the pastor allowed me to take the classes with himself and his wife. And his wife loved, loved, loved CJ. And so it was a good fit for us. But soon, people started to talk in the church. And there was these rumors flying around about my mother and about her trying to go after the pastor and about, that I was some type of hussy. And I was so hurt by some of the things that were being said. And, all of this got back to us, obviously. But the he say, she say was so bad that we ended up having to leave that church. And it was really hard because I genuinely loved the pastor and his wife. And during that time, it kind of sent me into a spiral. Like, if that's what church is like, then I don't want to be there. And I ended up just clubbing, partying. I ended up pregnant with my second child by this time. And my life I'm almost in like a spiral, out of control. And so I finally one night was like, Lord, I don't want to live like this. Take this agony away. And I started trying to be home more. I started trying to, be a better mother and be more upright, if you will. I started working at a Fortune 500 company. I'm not going to go into too many details about that, but that's where I met my husband. He and I were friends for a good while. We went to lunches together here and there, and we never really explored the idea of a relationship until, much later after we met. We knew we were attracted to each other, but it was one of those things where we both were a little skittish because, I had a situation with, as far as I was dealing with Cam's dad, and he had a situation with his daughter's mother at the time. So we, put it off, and then later on, we kind of decided to try to explore a dating relationship. It was hard to maintain. It was struggling to work. We always had some issues or some drama or some problems. So it ended up being where I received information about moving to Atlanta. So as I was gearing up to move to Atlanta, I was excited about it. Well, that fell through. And then next thing I know, I had received other information from a good friend of mine about moving to Tampa, Florida. Now, mind you, I'm not afraid of moving, don't get me wrong, but this would have been a huge, huge undertaking, a huge move for me. So I went down and visited. I was able to kind of get the lay of the land. I was able to interview and get the position that was open. My friend offered for me to stay there with her and her children because she had been going through a really rough divorce, and we began to be roommates. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. We helped each other out tremendously. Our kids love one another. It's great. It was a great, great fit for us. But eventually I realized I probably needed to get out on my own. We couldn't continue with that situation forever. And, she needed her space. I needed mine. And I ended up finding an apartment. During that time, I lost the position I had and began working at another position. But in between those times, my husband, who at the time we were just carrying on a phone conversation back and forth, we realized we wanted to try again to have a relationship. We carried on the phone back and forth. He came to visit. I came to visit. It went back and forth like that for a few months. And then he eventually came down to Florida to visit, and he proposed to me. I accepted. He went back to New York. A few months later, we were married, and then we bought a house. We did the whole family thing. We had a rough time with getting my stepdaughter, which you'll hear me refer to her as daughter because I told her from the very beginning there's no steps in our family. The first time I met her, I was instantly in love with her, so I knew that I would love her for the rest of our natural lives and beyond. So I always say daughter, but if you hear me say daughter, that's what I'm talking about. We had some rough times where there were jobs lost. We had to leave our house. We ended up in an apartment. We went back and forth here and there. But eventually things started to become more level. I'm not going to say the enemy left us alone, but things started to quiet down. We began to go to Calvary Chapel in Florida. And that's where I started realizing I don't need a denomination. I don't need a bunch of hierarchy and a bunch of pomp and circumstance. All I needed was God's word. So if you don't know about Calvary Chapel, I strongly urge you to visit a Calvary Chapel in your area. They actually teach you God's word line upon line, verse upon verse, and you can almost put your bookmark in and know exactly where you're going to be for next Sunday. And it's the same with the Bible study. There was Old Testament teaching, New Testament teaching. There were classes you could take. There was apologetics. There was all of these things. And I love the way it was. My children were excited about being at church. It was wonderful. Like, we had a great experience with the first Calvary Chapel. We realized then we wanted to move to Maryland after some time. We wanted to be closer to my brother and his family after we had visited a few times. And so we ended up in Maryland, and that's where we currently are. This is not our final stop by any means. This is just where God has us right now. And so although my testimony has a lot of things that you might find familiar or maybe unfamiliar, the one thing that stood out to me over the years is that God is in control. He's not going to put more on me than I can handle, and he's equipped me for this. And so I'm really setting my sights on the future. I'm grateful for what God has done for myself and for my family. I'm hoping that somebody can see this and understand there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, some of those times were dark and desperate while being molested. Maybe when I was dealing with a puppy love relationship that went sour, being a single mother, like all these things were very difficult. And, looking back, every single one of those things had to happen for me to be the woman I am today. And I really think that nothing could have been different, because I would not be exactly who I am. I would be different than I am. I'm grateful that I never became jaded about who God is and what his character is. I'm grateful that I never began to question God. It was in the back of my mind a couple of times, but it stayed there. And my faith was able to keep the enemy at bay. So I hope that this video was as informative as you expected. I hope you learned something about me and it helps you to kind of relate a little bit more. And if you have questions, by all means, leave them in the comment section. I'll try to answer them. I won't get super duper personal with a lot of the things, although I've become personal on this video. Some of the things I just can't go into too much detail about because other people are affected. But yeah, I just want you to know that when I say put God at the head of all you do, that's really deep down in me, to put God at the head of everything. If I'm cleaning the house, I'm doing it for the Lord. If I'm singing in church, I'm doing it for the Lord. If I am caring for my children, I'm doing it for the Lord. It's not my will, it's his will that, I'm able to do the things that he allows me to do. And I'm grateful for every breath, every blink of the eye, every heartbeat, everything. I'm grateful for it because the Lord has allowed it. And, I know that he has given me this platform in which to share with you guys. So I know that I've had some rough messages from people who don't appreciate my, I guess, religious views, and people who don't appreciate maybe some of the content. But, you can watch what you want and don't watch what you don't want. You have the power to do that. But those of you who are interested, I'm grateful for you watching. I'm grateful for your comments. I'm grateful when you send me messages. I really do appreciate it. And I thank you for bearing with me and sticking with me through all these years, because I started YouTube in the midst of a lot of these things, and it was therapeutic for me. It still is. I still enjoy it. I still have a passion for it. I'm sad I didn't keep going in all those years when we were transitioning from Florida and all this and that, and how I tried to keep it going, but life kind of took me away. But I'm grateful to have this time now. The kids are older and to be able to do this. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm sorry this video is super duper long. Rather than break it up into two parts, I'm looking at the time. I think we can make it one video. And if you like these types of videos, if you have anything else you want me to talk about, by all means, leave it in the comment section. If you have requests, please, by all means, send them to me. I do have a business inquiry email on the main page. And I also have a Twitter. My Twitter is @AlRaines, ALRAINES. So if you look at @AlRaines and follow me on Twitter, you can get kind of an insight into who I am with my little bits and pieces I like to put out there, because I post on there fairly regular. So people have asked me if I had a Snapchat. I do not have a Snapchat. I do have an Instagram, but it's for family only. I'm very sorry about that, but it's a private Instagram page. But eventually, maybe I'll get to the point where I have a public one. I don't know. But yeah, that's about it for this video. Put God at the head of all you do, and I'll see you on the next one.